I'd already given you some insight as to what we're going to talk about today, and the new face that you see with us. I was just having the exchange with Jilisa Snyder is a licensed doctoral level psychologist. She's clinical director of the Anna Marsh Clinic at the Brattleboro Retreat, which truthfully I knew existed, but I didn't know an awful lot about till I started researching you, which led to researching the Anna Marsh Clinic, which led to researching the Brattleboro Retreat. And so I never realized that the retreat itself was started way, way back in 1834. That's a long time ago. Um, and I found out that it's a private organization, nationally recognized leader in psychiatry as a not-for-profit, as you might expect, specializes in comprehensive services for mental health and addiction treatment of children, adolescents, and adults. Jalisa's areas of expertise include personality development, analytic self-psychology, therapeutic process, clinical supervision and training, mood, anxiety, trauma-related conditions, women's issues, mind-body dynamics, mindfulness and stress management, grief and loss, medical psychology, and a whole lot of other things that I know nothing about. But importantly for us, she teaches mental health and medical healthcare ethics in workshops, conferences, and graduate level courses throughout the Northeast. And the part that I do understand is that I also read that she likes gardening and Cajun cooking, so I could grasp that part.
Let's talk about that. Let's just forget
Okay.
about everything else. Let's just talk about gardening and Cajun cooking.
That would be awesome. Well, you can squeeze that in wherever you want. Folks, we just thought that as it starts getting darker like it is today, and we're all headed back indoors, and the days of sitting outside the restaurant to eat and everything are getting fewer and fewer really rapidly,
Yeah.
that it'd be good to get into this area and have someone chatting with us about, what to expect from employees, what signs you might recognize, and so on and so forth. And anyway, just the whole attitude adjustment kind of thing as employers and credit unions. And I did explain to Jalissa that credit union employees are, and I don't know about each of your credit unions, but just overall, it's a real mix of some people working in the office,
Mhm.
lobbies and drive-throughs and whatnot, and some people working at home. So that in and of itself probably poses some issues from time to time. So with that, Jalissa, it's all yours.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Let's make this as stressless and informal, and let's bring humor, so we can all relax and just try to learn from each other. The Anna Marsh Clinic is you can think of it as a typical, like, kind of group practice where you have 16 staff, psychiatrists, psychologists, and psychotherapists. And we're working, actually, most of us are on campus, but we work remotely from our office, which is really for us preferable, because it's kind of good to get out of your house. It's kind of good to be in your space, in your office, and just even walking through the campus to come in feels good. But we're doing like all remote work from our office. And then I have a couple staff, with childcare issues and other kinds of needs that are working remotely from their home. So, we've been in this, like all of you have been in this, and, we are coming to this topic as students also of, none of us have been through anything like this before. I think if I took a survey of this staff prior to COVID, probably no one would have said, gee, I really would like to be able to do teletherapy. I see that as a future goal for me. And now we're doing like all teletherapy, and we shifted the department completely, like within 2 weeks. Those were really interesting 2 weeks. And we've been really actually humbled and surprised how well it's going. And we all look forward to the time when we can have people back in the office, certainly. But we're all learning a lot through this whole experience, which is going on a lot longer than anybody, I think, would have preferred. But in for a nickel, in for a dime, right? So I put together like just 14 slide PowerPoint. I'm just going to go through it because I wanted us to just share some fundamental basic information. And then what I really would like to do is just open this up for all kinds of conversation. Does that sound okay? All right. So I'm going to bring it up. Can you see it? The PowerPoint?
No.
You can't.
Not yet, no.
Yeah, let me see, try it this way. How's that? Can you see it
It's
now?
coming now. Yes,
Okay,
now we
good.
can.
All right, good. All right.
Can you just click up on where it says slideshow?
Yes.
Right there, yeah. And if you go from beginning,
Okay. So this is the beginning.
yeah, just
The,
above that, click on where it says from beginning. Right there, yes.
oh,
There
okay,
you go.
great.
Now we
Thank
have
you.
a full screen view of your
Great.
slide.
And if I want to go to the next one, what do I do?
You should be able to click your mouse or use the arrow keys on your keyboard if you've got a keyboard in front of you.
Okay, I see. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that. So I want to talk to you a little bit about natural disaster psychology. Okay, so we don't know anything about COVID's impact. I mean, this is going to be the source of so many dissertations over the next 10 to 20 years. We're right in the midst of a phenomenon, but we do know a lot about natural disaster psychology. So I wanted to draw from that and just share some of the things we know. What we know is that depression, anxiety, substance abuse, child abuse, and domestic violence, PTSD, and other psychiatric disorders increase after natural disasters. We also know that most adults are resilient. There's a spatially wide-ranging disasters will, of course, result in a larger number of people who are affected. Vulnerable populations appear to be healthcare workers like me and my colleagues. And in COVID-19, patients and families, those people with pre-existent psychosocial stressors, I would say pre-existent mental health and physical health challenges, and when there's a significant amount of community loss. Costs related to mental health repercussions can be even greater than physical health consequences as a result of any type of natural disaster. So with COVID, let's look at what we're experiencing together. We're in an unprecedented societal experience. Pandemics are confounding and unfamiliar. In most everyone's lifetime, I know this is their first. They can be chronic and prolonged. With pandemics, there's a lack of a safety zone. There aren't any clear defined boundaries of where the pandemic is and is not. There's a persistence of uncertainty, both temporal in terms of time and spatially. There's social isolation and restrictions. And pandemics are invisible in terms of our senses, our sense of smell, our sense of sight, our hearing. It cannot detect a pandemic. It cannot detect a virus. There's no clear boundaries. So there's a fear of invasion. There's an ebb and flow in terms of the unpredictability. There's ambiguous information and a paucity of clear leadership. And the decision-making processes are challenging in terms of who or what can I trust. So I'm sure this all sounds very familiar in terms of what we've been dealing with since March and will continue to for quite a while. Now, all human beings psychologically have what's called an assumptive world. The way we organize information, one of the ways is we via our experiences, we come to a number of assumptions that take us through a day, take us through our lives. You know, you get in the car in the morning, you turn on the key, you assume the car is going to start. You know, that's like one assumption of hundreds that we have that take us through a day. However, in a pandemic, the core beliefs of these assumptions regarding controllability and predictability are shaken up quite to the core for many people. And when our assumptive world is challenged, or it's shattered, or someone's safety is threatened, there's a heightened sympathetic nervous system arousal and attempt to detect danger. Now, the sympathetic nervous system, I could do, you know, a half a day on that, but What we're talking about is that all of us, very, very inborn, it's very primal in the primitive parts of our brain, have a nervous system arousal that detects threat and danger. And when we detect threat and danger, whether we're conscious of it or not, the part of our nervous system that gets aroused is called the sympathetic nervous system. That's where, your heart might start beating more quickly, you might start shaky, you could feel dizzy. So there's a heightened sympathetic nervous system arousal that's actually become chronic. And if it becomes chronic without sufficient degree of restoration and balance and lowering, then we're going to really be dealing with both mental health and physical health challenges. And there's anxiety, right? And there's anxiety on the emotional level, affective anxiety, there's cognitive anxiety, the things we're thinking about and having to make decisions about. And then there's physiological anxiety, and that has to do with, again, the biological nervous system anxiety. There is a COVID-19 anxiety scale. It is shown with some samples of participants in taking this anxiety scale. There's an increase in physiological anxiety. And when prolonged without restoration, it can lead again to serious mental and physical health challenges. And I just really can't emphasize this enough. Often what we see is after the disaster has subsided, then we often see a lot of people with pretty serious physical and mental health problems. So let's talk about COVID-19 grief and the risk of complicated grief. There is generative and healthy grief, and then there's grief that's more complicated and actually does usually require some guidance. So let's look what we're dealing with here. There's an isolation of the ill. There's an isolation of people who are dying from their friends, from their family, and the community. So when I hear of the 218,000 deaths, I just don't think of 2018 people. I think of millions of people who are affected, because anyone who has died has a whole family, friends, and community around them. There's, with unanticipated deaths, there can be psychological shock. There can be helplessness. And there's ruptures going on around attachment bonds and even touch. When someone has a shock, a psychological shock, there can be a crisis in the meaning paradigms you have in your assumptive world about the way things work. There's a medical system and provider strain, and the rituals of mourning have been compromised, as we all know, at this time. So in disaster mental health, there's 5 core elements that are needed from organization and leadership. And you as leaders can learn from this. I'm a leader and I'm learning from this. The 5 essential core elements are calming, connectedness, hope, self-efficacy. Self-efficacy means that one feels within themselves an effectiveness to promote positivity, and a sense of safety. And these are core. And this is based on the literature on disaster mental health, but I think are very important elements that we can be bringing into our own lives as best as possible and our workplaces. In interventions, we want to focus on the psychophysiological arousal that many people are experiencing. We want to focus on emotional therapeutic expression, and we want to be aware of the depth of social isolation many people are experiencing. We want to understand and clarify for each individual and the group meaning-making processes and symbols. Now we'll talk a little bit more about that. And we want to provide psychoeducation. We want to normalize this. People who are experiencing what I'm talking about, this is not abnormal psychology. This is normal psychology. And also, as this process is getting prolonged, there's a lot now being written about COVID fatigue. There's a concept in the psychological literature called caregiver fatigue. That refers to someone who's in a primary caregiver role, often for a aging or ill parent or spouse, or a child with severe disabilities. And so now what's coming in the literature is what's called COVID fatigue. So we'll go back to this later, but these are just some interventions to bring into daily living. Different things for different people, but I think are really important, that we just can't take our mental health for granted. Relaxation and calming practices. There's yoga for some people. PMR is called progressive muscular relaxation. It's a form of relaxation. And there's all kinds of breathing practices. There's a whole field called mindfulness-based stress reduction. There's balancing stimulation. You want to modulate because we're being highly stimulated at way too much of a rate for the human psyche to absorb in a healthy way. Between the pandemic and what's going on socially and politically and in our personal lives, our work lives. So we want to modulate by stepping forward and being really engaged when we can be engaged, and we also need to step back and distance ourselves and have fluidity between the two. Physical exercise and movement, really, really important. Sleep hygiene, therapeutic communications and connections, creative expression, art, narrative writing, music, counseling and online trainings, and education, deliberative information seeking, because there's so much information that's coming in that what I found is people want information overload, and a lot of it's very repetitive, and a lot of it is dramatic because it is, but kind of over dramatic and sensationalistic, and that is not helping. So now I want to shift. That was the first half of the presentation. Now I want to shift to, like, you're all managers and leaders. So I found an article from the Harvard Business Review on helping leaders lead in the midst of COVID. And so I'm drawing the rest of the slides from that article. So one is the advice to us, and I'm saying us, all of us, is to be authentic and allow ourselves to be vulnerable. So I just came off of taking like about 4 days off, and I was telling my staff, we had a meeting today, how helpful that was for me. That was really restorative. It felt really helpful to be off of Zoom, like 35 hours a week. It was, I was just telling them what about it was really helpful for me. Okay, so I'm being authentic and allowing myself to be vulnerable and saying, you know, I need support too. Normalize mental health. You know, we all know there's a societal stigma around mental health. It's been forever, and it is better now. There's less stigma, but there's still a lot of stigma. So what we want to do is normalize mental health, and mental health is just important as physical health. You know, when someone goes and gets like physical therapy, or they're getting particular tests, they're seeing doctors for a medical reason, we don't see that person as less than or inferior or not strong. So why would we see someone like that when they're trying to do the same thing to take care of their mental health? So we want to model normalizing mental health and practices to improve our mental health and decrease stigma. As leaders, we want to be relatable and we want to be transparent. We want our staff to feel they can really come and talk to us. And that has to do with how we communicate and how we relate to people. We want to use our leadership power to build trust. We also want to model healthy behaviors. So we want to prioritize self-care and set work-life boundaries. You know, I'm going to take a vacation. Hey, does anybody want to take a walk with me today? I have an hour open. We want to share how you are also taking care of yourself with your staff. You don't need to share things that are intimate or inappropriate to share with staff, but there's a lot that we can share with staff. Some examples, again, taking walks, staycations, exercising. Now, I put this in, the Business Review article didn't, but I think it's really important to bring some fun and lightness to the workplace. I think it's really important. We should be doing this anyway. All of this stuff is stuff that we know, right? We should be doing this stuff anyway, but I think we need to pay more attention to doing it at this particular time. So like one of the things I started doing is every few Thursdays, I bring in like boxes of ice cream, like pops, like Haagen-Dazs, like really, good stuff. And I just stuff the freezer and I say it's Ice Cream Thursday. And I cannot tell you how much people love that. I mean, we can't do the shared food that we would have liked to do, like bring a cake. We can't do that. So I find something that's individually wrapped. I just do certain things that just bring a little bit of lightness to the day. And humor really helps. As much as I send out dozens of emails a day, I always make sure I send out some things that are funny. I just try to bring lightness and engagement and humor when, of course, it makes sense to do that. Want to build a culture of connection. So check in with your staff regularly and check in with them directly, not just as a whole group. But I will often just call each one of my staff and leave a personal message for them or a personal email to them. Hi, I'm thinking about you. Checking in. How you doing? I know this is a very stressful time. Is there anything that I could be doing more or less that you would find supportive? So I check in as a group, but check in with people directly. And also, a lot of times you check in with people and you'll say, how you doing? Fine, I'm doing okay. That's great. But maybe we should ask some more specific questions. Like, I know you're doing great. That's wonderful. But hey, look, we're all in this together. This is terribly challenging. And, is there something more I can do to be helpful for you at this particular time? Is there something we could do to rearrange your work in a way that could be take away some stress? I mean, there's enough other stress going on. And always be compassionate. And I know this sounds simple, but listen. I mean, really listen. If someone's talking or sending you an email, like be patient and really listen. And sometimes just not responding immediately, you find out that the other will talk to you more. Provide flexibility and be inclusive. So proactive communication. Again, bringing communication out to your staff, not waiting till they say something and just be in a responsive mode. Anticipate your staff's needs are going to change. It's like, for example, I had a staff member who husband is a school teacher, and so he was able to be home when he was working remotely. But then all of a sudden his school required him to work in the workplace, and that's going to change back and forth. If there's a COVID case, he's going to be back home. So we discussed this and figured out how we could arrange a work situation for her that could accommodate that she may need to work from home and then work from the office and work from home and work in the office, because we're anticipating that her needs are going to shift depending on her husband's job. Encourage your staff to let you know problems. I have always said to my staff this. I say, if you're wondering, should I call Jilisa about this or not? You may think, well, I don't want to bother her. She's really busy. This might be something I can figure out myself. I said, the minute you go into that thought process, the answer is contact me. Just contact me. And when anyone asks a question, I'm always welcoming. Even if it might be like in back of my mind, well, I gave that directive like 5 times. You're asking me the question. I never say that. I say, I'm glad you asked the question. Let us not make assumptions about what our staff need, and be generous, as flexible as possible. Then the other guideline, and I love this one, communicate more than you think you need to. So I remind myself periodically of that. Like things seem to be going well. People generally come to me with problems. I have times that I meet with people, but maybe I need to send out another communication, just checking in to see how things are going. Communicate more than you really think you need to. I'd rather have my staff rolling their eyes that they're getting another inquisitive email from me. That's fine. That's great. I'd rather them doing that rather than not getting enough communication. I want them to know I've got their backs. Be clear of, also be very clear about what the norms are, because our norms are changing. So a lot of people are very confused. And what I'm experiencing, and I'm sure that you may be experiencing some of this, is that someone will ask for something that if it was just up to me, I'd say, sure, but I need to go through different parts of the organization because I don't know what the organization's norms are now. And in fact, I asked a question and it went to the director of HR, and the person said, I never had this question before now. So we created a new norm, so let's be clear with our norms. And if we're modifying work hours, let's be as clear as possible about what we're expecting people to do. I think people do better with clarity. We want to reduce stress and clarity about priorities. So like there's a couple of initiatives I'd like to roll out, but I'm holding back on them. We had a major initiative I was rolling out in the department, and we held back on that when COVID adjustments needed to be made because it just wasn't an absolute priority. And what was more of a priority was helping people get adjusted to this new way of working. And provide whatever security is realistic, but be realistic. I don't believe in providing false security. I believe in being honest and authentic, but whatever security you can provide, provide it. So we're striving for a mentally healthy culture. So let your staff know of available mental health resources. Here at the retreat, we have an EAP. Anyone can go to the EAP, an employee assistance program, for free, completely confidential. I remind staff of that periodically. Be thoughtful, again, is stigma and shame. Whenever we're talking about mental health, be thoughtful that for some people, it's going to bring up just the idea of mental health, stigma and shame. So just be considerate of that. Increase awareness of whole person health, that when we talk about our health, we're talking about our psyche and our soma. And if you're doing performance reviews, be as collaborative and compassionate as you can be. Provide good feedback. Think of your culture as a learning culture, and just not to put unnecessary pressure because people are very pressured already just in their personal lives and work lives and trying to manage this pandemic. Okay, so I'm done with the PowerPoint. Now we can open up to questions and conversations. Okay. Here we go. So Joe, I think I sent you a copy, right? So you could also share that with whoever you'd like to share that with. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And everybody's in control of their own muting, so feel free to unmute and comment, ask questions, wherever you want to go.
Hi, Susan.
Yes.
Yes.
I was actually turning up my volume, but I'll also comment as well. So I am responsible for human resources and at my credit union. And one of the things that I'm curious about that I didn't hear you mention was substance abuse and accepted overuse or misuse of alcohol seems to be more prevalent, more accepted. Humorous, inappropriate use of humor to explain overuse of alcohol, and it feels amplified during this time frame.
Yeah.
Can you talk to that at all? Just
sure. Yeah. Can you, if you don't mind, can you give me like an example of what you witnessed?
I think it's conversations that are happening where there's a lot more reference to being drunk, and being drunk more commonly during the work week, and that it's it's COVID. What else are we going to do? It's how I deal with my stress. It seems to be a much more common conversation with staff than it ever was prior to COVID, and it's concerning. And then issues of tardiness, issues of attendance, things that you did address, but I didn't hear you really talk about use of substance to help.
Yeah, one is thank you for bringing that up. The presentation is far from, including everything. And you bring up a very good point in that, look, whenever we're vulnerable and strained and stressed and we're in situations that we feel helpless about, or and many people feel hopeless and overcome, and all that this pandemic could mean for different people, that we're all vulnerable to rely on some of our own, we could say, weaknesses or fragilities, and we all have them. Okay, again, I'm normalizing this. We all have them. So yes, so there's a great concern about an increase in substance use. There's a great concern about an increase in child abuse, concern about anyone who has any kind of addictive behavior. It could be gambling, eating disorders, and so on. And maybe that what you're seeing is some people are rationalizing it, and I to some degree, I think that there's a level of that maybe outside of alcohol that could be like harmless. Like if someone said, well, look, I'm not going to try to lose those 10 pounds right away. I need to have my, piece of cake every night. That's pretty harmless. Okay. But there is a point where it can be very troublesome, and particularly around substance use. And because this is prolonged, let's say someone typically would have a couple glasses of wine or a couple beers at the end of the day, and now they're having like 4 to 6. And maybe if this was a couple week type of thing, that would be a phase. Okay, and then they would become more regulated, assuming they don't have a serious substance abuse disorder. Okay, but I think what we're seeing now is it's not a short type of thing. This isn't going to be over. We've been at this 8 months now. So close to 8 months, 7, 8 months. It's going to be a while. I mean, I can't, I'm not an expert. I can't predict, but I think we're dealing with another 6 to 8 months. I don't know what you folks think. I think that would be pretty fortunate if that was going on. So I think the conversation then has to shift that, look, on a short-term temporary basis, look, we're all human, and, having some more alcohol might have been an effective way just to cope, but it's not an effective way to cope when something is prolonged. And actually what could be happening as unwittingly is the person could be developing a substance use disorder. So I think if you're talking to someone, I don't know as a human resource director how much, what your scope is.
I think I think maybe it's an opportunity for us to provide training to our supervisors and managers about when you hear these conversations, they're uncomfortable when they hear the conversation, so they're not addressing them. And I think that there's an opportunity for us to help to support our supervisors and managers in having difficult conversations with employees to say, remind them of EAP, remind them of what's available to them instead of sort of dismissing the conversation. And I think, as you said early on, people were dismissing it because we didn't think it would endure as long as it has.
Yes.
But now it feels as though there's really a shift for some people in work patterns, and I think it's related to, as I said, just a overutilization or over normalizing the use of alcohol for this pandemic.
Yeah, and one of the major concerns, and it's being written about, and people are really talking about it, is that, we're now entering the tough time of the year in terms of mental health and mood and lots of other things. And I think that having the pandemic come in March, and then, within a couple months, spring started emerging. And then, we have summer, we can get outside, we have more light. We're now beginning to enter into the time of more darkness, cold, and the social isolation I'm very, very concerned about, because most people I know who are doing socialization, it's outside. And, and if you cross country skiing, snowshoe, there's a certain level of that you can still do, but it's not the same as, having some coffee with someone outside, or taking a very relaxed walk and just enjoying the beauty of the sun. And so I'm very concerned about these issues now that we're just beginning to enter into, the middle fall towards winter period of time. I mean, the other thing, I don't know your cultures, and I don't know, if you have staff meetings or how these kinds of things are discussed within your organizations and your work communities, but it might be even to try to, again, normalize it, if it was possible to have some kind of overall communication that, many of us, have found ways to cope with more of the immediacy of the pandemic. And the ways that we coped might have worked fine for a short period of time, but now that this is prolonged, and it's going to continue to be prolonged, and we're entering a difficult season, that there's concern that we might need to find other ways to cope with this, and then introducing more healthy ways of coping to the group.
Sure.
I'm always trying to find ways to not pathologize. I think when in a work situation, unless it's, a real work performance problem, and there's some real aberrant behaviors, I try to talk about like normal human psychology and behavior and coping. And, I think then people can feel more comfortable, less threatened, and less defensive. And if people get defensive, they're not really going to be available to hear what you have to say. If people get defensive, they're going to be focused on how to manage the emotional distress they're feeling, and they're going to get defended, and they're going to pull away. Okay, and this is not necessarily conscious. It's maybe conscious and intentional, but it often is just really unconscious. They're just not going to hear you. And so I try to find a way to, again, to bring an understanding to situations and not pathologize it, but bring my concerns. It could be a manager saying, I've heard you mention, the beer parties that are going on regularly, and I have to say, I just have some concern. And I don't know, do your staff struggle with when they hear somebody say something that's about their personal life? Is there struggle, or would it be intrusive in a work-related role to bring that up? I mean, I wonder if there's also some tension and struggle on that level.
I think there's concern over boundaries, yes.
Yeah.
And I just think that it's uncomfortable for supervisors and managers to have those conversations. They just don't have a lot of practice with it because, as you said, this is the first pandemic we've all lived through, right? Yeah.
So again, some of that might be some training for the staff. It might be some, like what we're doing right now. Okay, we're doing a 1 hour, like kind of educational presentation, but I wonder if there were more of those types of services offered to the staff. Maybe the EAP can come in and offer some in-services to your staff and make that, again, part of like creating a mentally healthy and a emotionally and even physically healthy work culture and environment. So you bring it into the culture rather than the model of hoping the person goes to the EAP. I mean, of course, we do hope that, but unless it's a management requirement, the person goes to EAP, it's really up to the individual's choice. So what if it got brought into the culture?
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
So we meet with our staff. I mean, most of our staff are still working from home, and they're using Zoom to communicate with. What are some signs we should look for that indicate that an individual is in trouble?
Yeah. Well, that's really hard over Zoom. You know, you don't have the immediacy of their presence. It's, you know, a lot of people are missing what we call those hallway interactions, where sometimes like what needs to be nipped in the bud just happens more spontaneously. And I think we're really, really missing that. We're missing the spontaneity. We're missing the kind of communication that happens when we're in close proximity. Walking even to your car at the end of the day, you know, sometimes those are where some of the most important kinds of information is shared, right? And we're missing all of that.
Right.
So some thoughts that just come to mind. What I've been doing is sending out emails about every month to the staff and saying, hey, you know, I'm really missing this. I say, I'm really missing this. I'm just missing that, you know, bumping into you or getting a cup of coffee or, and so I'm wondering if we can just set up a time, you know, just to hang out together, you know, just check in and, you know, over the phone, if they prefer, or over Zoom. So I'm trying to create some time that isn't like we're meeting to discuss a clinical issue. It's not supervision per se. Of course, I'm their supervisor, right? But it's out of that typical role, you know. I'm not doing the performance review or anything like that. I'm just like saying, you know, I've said to a couple of my staff, I've really missed you. I've really missed you. And you know, we're all in this together, and you know, how about a phone call and see how, and just, I'm trying to find other ways to connect. Okay, so then I mean, the whole thing you're talking about is how can you build communication so that if there's a problem, you would have an awareness of it. And we're agreeing that it's really hard to do right now. Okay, I mean, unless the person who's working at home, you know, the kids are running in, there's fighting, screaming, you know, I mean, unless there's like a display of like, oh, you know, what's going on here, you really wouldn't know in the ways that you typically would. That's, I would try to reach out to people in other ways.
Okay.
And really not like, I need to make sure you're doing okay, but saying like, I just really miss those interactions we have, you know, and of course this isn't the same, but that's one thing I would suggest. The other thing is, again, the culture of safety. A lot of people are very concerned about bringing problems up to their supervisor because the person is their supervisor. And they may trust their supervisor, but the supervisor is also being supervised by other people. And those people are being supervised by an organization. I mean, a supervisor is not a completely independent or autonomous role. And so a lot of people get concerned for a number of different reasons about bringing up problems. So again, if, as much as we can create a culture of trust, you know, we want to be able to have people come and talk to us. But I can understand why some people would hold back, because they might be concerned of some negative ramifications that could come to them if they share some things. So the best we can do is, again, be compassionate, be patient, provide communicational networks for people, and then just hope that they will bring to us what we would like them to. And also letting people know, look, if you're struggling, this is not an easy thing. You know, this is, we're all trying to figure this out together. But if you're struggling with getting your work done, if you're struggling figuring out how are you going to get your work done in the midst of working from home, which is not easy for a lot of people.
No, it's not.
Not at all. That's why my staff are really glad they come into their office. You know, just to normalize that, just to normalize it and say, look, I'm here to help you problem solve. There may be some problems that you're having that if you talk to me about them, I can try to figure out with you some efficiencies and maybe some different ways of doing things or different hours of working. Like, I'm here as your partner to try to help problem solve this with you. And also to learn, because again, we're experiencing it too.
Great.
And that's where, you know, I think if anything, the Harvard Business Review article, they based that article on some research that they have done in other companies pre-pandemic and even during the beginning of pandemic. And they really were stressing how these companies are getting better results by the leaders being more transparent. It might be saying, oh, you know, I have told you there were a couple days I didn't even know how I was going to figure this one out, given everything else I was managing. You know, and so you're not presenting yourself as someone that, like, I'm the supervisor, I've got it all figured out, now I'm here to help you. You're also sharing some of your challenges, and that will often open the door for people feeling comfortable sharing with you their challenges.
Great. Thank you.
I don't know, Jilisa, if there's any validity to this, but I have kept thinking for a long time now about, and maybe this doesn't happen in Vermont Credit Unions, but in some workplace somewhere, I have this vision that there are the two extremes of people's attitudes. There's someone that, you know, has a lot of worry, a lot of angst and whatnot about all the kinds of things that we've been talking about. And then someone who either legitimately thinks that's all overkill and, you know, so on and so forth, or maybe has some inner concerns but has a front that, you know, kind of pretends to brush it off or whatnot. And I'm always curious about whether those two ends of the pendulum, when they're in the same workplace, whether they are, you know, clashing in the back of their minds, sort of, you know, that it kind of builds the angst, I guess I'd call it, of both of those people, because, you know, one extreme thinks the other extreme is, you know, wrong or overdoing it, or, you know, whichever way it goes.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's a really good point. It can be very diminishing. You know, if there's one, let's say, dimension of the workforce that is kind of, in a way, scoffing at another dimension of the workforce, that they think they're dramatizing this or exaggerating this to a degree that they're not experiencing. And I think it's perceptive to say that the other part of the workforce may not, generally, they might not be experiencing it. There are people that I know, Joe, there's some of my clients that are saying, this is just pretty great for an introvert. They're not happy the pandemic is here, by the way, none of that. But they're like, boy, this has just relieved a lot of stress for me because I'm so introverted. And now no one's expecting me to go out, you know? So for some people, this is like what's required, the social isolation, all the like boundaries, and there's no hallway discussions or whatnot. Right. What's required actually fits pretty nicely into their comfort zone and their preferences. So there might be people like that. There may be people who they don't have small kids at home. They don't have teenagers, you know, dealing with schools. They're not having kids in college who are now home. This whole social upheaval hasn't impacted them as directly. Okay, and so it might be hard for them to have as much empathy that there's other people where it's really become a major upheaval in their life. And then there's people who are very defensive. They're always, where they're anything that smacks of human vulnerability, they don't do that. So it could be a combination of all of that in that one dimension. Okay, and then there's the other dimension of people that this is very, very major, very significant, has affected people they love, people they care about, their community, their families, their kids. They might have elderly parents they can't see. This is just impacting people in many different ways. So I think that it's, unless you wanted to do some kind of formal sensitivity training and get everybody in a group together, I probably wouldn't try really hard to get the two groups to come together. I think what I would do is more on an educational perspective. I would, and the educational piece would be more saying that this pandemic and how it's affecting us is both a shared social phenomenon, and it's also affecting us individually in similar and different ways. And so for some people, it's really not much of an upheaval in their life. And for some people, it's just turned everything topsy-turvy.
So the educational effort could be, in my simple approach, would be more along the lines of everyone's entitled to their opinion and we need to respect each other's opinion, sort of.
Right.
Bottom line. Yeah.
Exactly. And also to, I think, just validate that it is affecting people really differently. Mm. Than other people. I have staff with small kids. I have an intern right now with a 2-year-old. And we have to deal with daycare situations. I have staff with college students, and now the kids are home, and they're trying to figure all of that out. The mental health of their family might be at risk with all these changes. And then I have staff, like someone like myself, who is in a much older age range. And so, family is launched, and it's, and my home space is not being changed in any way. And so I'm not having to deal with that stressor. I do have an elderly parent that I have not been able to see in another state that I would see regularly and travel regularly, and I can't do that. Yes, and also there's, the term 1 degree of separation. So like COVID is out there, but for each one of us, the degree of separation is different. I mean, there's people who have lost, like people in their inner intimacy group. There's people who have lost a member of their family. There's people who have a dear friend that has lost someone close to them. There's people who really haven't lost, thankfully, anyone they know, or anyone that they know hasn't lost anyone close to them. So, it all depends. That also will affect people differently. And the other thing is the way we cope. We each have our own personal psychology. Some people cope more by distancing themselves from stressful events or distraction. And some people are more people that go towards, they go engage more emotionally with distress. I mean, we all have different ways of coping, and we use different ways in different situations. So yes, it's all good. It's all fine. I think the important thing is that to try to strive to have a culture where one group isn't invalidating or dismissing or being negative towards how other parts of the team are coping. That would be problematic, because that would affect the felt sense of security and trust and ease within the group itself. And that would be unfortunate.
Well, thank you for all of that. Are there any other comments, questions from anybody for Jilisa? I have a bunch of people on the phone,
Okay. Hi, people on the phone.
but they're all muted right now.
Yeah, they're all muted, right? So they can hear us, but we can't hear them, right?
Right, right. Maybe they
Yeah.
all have wild parties going on wherever they
Absolutely. I can't even imagine. You see, that's the idea. We want to bring some humor, right? A
are.
little bit of lightness. I'll tell you, it goes a long way.
Hey, thank you very much,
Okay.
Jilisa. You've been,
Okay.
it's been a great conversation. You've been very informative and helpful to us.
Okay.
And maybe we can reschedule to talk about gardening and Cajun cooking too.
Anytime.
All right.
Yes. And even direct communication.
Okay. Hey, thank you very much, everybody, for being on the line with us this afternoon. We greatly appreciate it. We'll have another one of these coming up, probably not next week, but a couple weeks down the road. We'll give you plenty of advance notice. And thank you again, Jilisa. If
Okay.
anybody
Thank you. It's
wants,
been a pleasure. It's good to meet everybody.
Thank
Be
you.
well. Take care.
thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.